photograph was taken just as the last rays of a fading 1902 afternoon slipped behind the horizon. A soft golden light spilled through the heavy curtains of the room, dancing across the polished surface of an old wooden table. On it, a framed portrait of the family, still untouched by time. In this moment, the world outside could have been forgotten. All that mattered was the quiet tranquility of the scene before the lens. A mother, her figure poised and composed, sat with her child nestled against her side. His small frame pressed against her, the weight of his innocent trust resting comfortably in her arms. The two of them gazed outward, their faces serene, their expressions seemingly unmarked by the burdens of life. The kind of image one might expect from any family album, the kind of image that seemed to capture everything right with the world. The house itself in which they sat stood solemn and dignified behind them. It had weathered many seasons, its walls showing the subtle signs of age, but still it held a quiet dignity, an air of permanence. The furniture, worn yet well cared for, mirrored the soft light that bathed the room, creating a sense of peacefulness, of normality. The picture was a reminder of a time when the world seemed to function according to simple, timeless rules. A mother, a child, a home. The lens, however, captured only what was visible. The calm of the mother's face, the child's slight smile, the soft gleam of the room's furniture. What it could not capture was the presence lingering in the background, not fully visible, not fully tangible. The frame in which the photograph rested was modest, a dark wooden border, slightly chipped along the edges as though it too had lived for many years. It was framed with love, yet the love contained within it was anything but clear. The mother's eyes, warm but distant, held secrets the camera would never capture. The child, his smile a touch too fixed, too deliberate, wore the face of one who had been trained to be seen but not heard. There was a stillness to the moment, an absence of movement or sound, as though time itself had held its breath, unwilling to disturb the fragile beauty of this moment. A sepia-toned reminder of a happiness that could never last, a glimpse into a life preserved for eternity, but one that was already slipping away in silence. The shutter clicked, and in that moment, as the camera recorded the image, it also sealed something darker. The secrets of that house were locked away, tucked carefully into the corners of the frame, hidden from the world outside. The photograph, though innocent in appearance, held beneath its surface something far more complex, something that would never be revealed by the passing of time alone. The shadows cast by the afternoon light seemed to stretch farther than they should, lingering at the edges of the photograph like specters, unnoticed but ever present. Behind the mother, behind the child, the faint outline of another presence, unseen yet felt. A presence that would not be named, a presence that seemed to belong neither to the mother nor the child but to something else entirely. The lens, in its cold, mechanical precision, could not capture the unease that flickered in the corners of their eyes, the tension that existed between them, unspoken but undeniable. No, the lens recorded only the calm, the stillness, the perfect family. It was a story of love, of safety and peace, but it was a lie, or at least part of one. For while the world would come to know the mother and her child as a symbol of familial devotion, the truth of their lives, of the forces that shaped them, was a far darker story. A story hidden not behind the walls of their home, but behind the frame of that photograph, tucked away from the world's gaze. A story that the camera in all its precision could not uncover. There was something behind them, something lurking in the shadows, something the camera could not catch. And that very shadow would remain buried in time, a secret that no one could quite unravel. For many years it would pass unnoticed, its presence only suggested by the cold stillness of the image. The smile of the child, the distant gaze of the mother, both were part of the performance, part of the narrative they were expected to live, expected to present to the world. The world would never know the truth of their lives, not in this photograph, nor in any other. The lens could not see what was not visible. And so the photograph remained, a relic of another time, a symbol of something that had once been. It rested in an album, gathering dust, its edges curling ever so slightly with age. The years passed and the house, once vibrant with life, grew silent. The child, no longer a child, moved away. The mother, still living in the house that had long since outgrown its usefulness, grew frail and tired. The walls that had witnessed their lives now stood as silent witnesses to a history that no one would ever hear. Yet the shadow behind the photograph never left. It lingered in the corners of the house, unnoticed but never quite gone. It would not be until years later, when the house was emptied of all who had once lived there, that anyone would stumble upon the truth. Buried beneath the floorboards in a forgotten drawer, the remnants of a letter, a yellowed piece of paper, its ink faded but still legible, would come to light. The words, written in a hurried hand, would unravel the family's dark history. It would speak of a life far more complex, far more tragic than the portrait ever suggested. The mother, the child, and the house they had lived in, it would all be seen for what it truly was. But for now, in this quiet moment, there is only the photograph, only the mother and her child, their image frozen in time. The world will never know what really happened, not through this photograph. The camera, in its silent way, captured only the outward facade of their existence. But there, in the shadow that lingers behind them, lies the truth that will remain hidden for years to come. And so the photograph stays, a haunting reminder of what is seen and what is not. Some secrets, some truths lie too deeply buried to ever be fully uncovered. The house still stands, but the silence feels heavier now. The shadows behind that image will never fully dissipate, not until the truth comes to light, long after the final shutter click. The years wore on, and with them the whispers began. In the quiet, dusty halls of the once proud family estate, the murmurs spread like ink in water, subtle at first, but growing clearer with each passing day. The family, once a portrait of stability and grace, began to fray at the edges. It was the mother who first caught the eye of the town, though not in any way she would have wanted. The neighbors had once praised her for her grace, her poise, her gentle ways. But now they spoke of her retreating into the darker chambers of the house. The doors, once always open, were now often closed. The faint sound of her footsteps could be heard echoing through the halls, but they grew quieter with time, like the fading notes of a song long forgotten. She no longer sat at the front windows, greeting passers-by with a smile that had once made the house feel alive. Instead, she lingered in the shadows of the house, away from the sunlight, away from the world outside. What had once been a home filled with laughter and light was now quiet, distant, as if the very air in the house had grown heavy with something unspoken. The neighbors whispered about her isolation, her apparent withdrawal from the world. But no one ever asked why. No one dared. They could only guess, and guess they did. The child, too, had changed. Once he had been full of life, his laughter filling the corners of the rooms like the sunlight that poured through the windows. But now there was a silence about him, a stillness that hung in the air whenever he was near. His eyes, once wide with curiosity, seemed to hold a sadness that didn't belong to a child. Where he had once run through the halls with joy, now he moved with a careful, almost deliberate step. His voice, once a constant background hum in the house, was now barely a whisper. The once vibrant energy of youth had been replaced by a quiet unease. He no longer played with the other children in the neighborhood. His once eager smile had become a rare and fleeting thing, and when it did appear, it never quite reached his eyes. The house, once so full of life, had grown unnervingly still. The air in the room seemed thicker, heavier, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The father, a towering figure in the community, was seen less and less. When he did appear, it was with an icy demeanor, his presence a looming shadow in the halls of the house. His once warm gaze had turned cold, his smile a rare and distant memory. He spent long hours in his study, the door always firmly shut behind him. The crack beneath the door would sometimes reveal a hint of light, but the sounds from within remained muffled, distant. There were no more late-night dinners or quiet conversations by the fire. The family, once united in purpose, was now divided in silence. And though the house seemed to be as pristine as ever, with every surface polished and every chair in its proper place, something had gone terribly wrong. Something was festering within its walls, something hidden from the world. The staff of the house, those who had once served the family with respect, began to share their own whispers. It was through their quiet murmurs that the truth of what was happening behind closed doors began to seep out. The father, they said, was not the man he once appeared to be. His harsh discipline had grown more frequent, his demands more extreme. The very atmosphere of the house seemed to be filled with an unspoken fear, a fear that could not be named but could be felt in every corner. His voice, when it did rise, was always sharp, always filled with a coldness that sent shivers down the spines of those who heard it. The once gentle voice of the mother had become a hollow echo of its former self. She moved through the house like a ghost, her footsteps silent, her presence barely noticed. Her words, when they came, were few, and they were always flat, almost robotic. The light in her eyes had dimmed with each passing day, replaced by a vacant look that seemed to stare past the present into some place far, far away. She had become a shell of the woman she once was. Her warmth, her kindness had been swallowed by something darker. What had happened to her? The servants whispered of the once radiant woman who now seemed nothing more than a shadow of herself. And the child, oh, the child, his silence spoke louder than anything. There were no more bursts of laughter, no more cries of joy. He had become quieter, more withdrawn, his innocence tainted by the heavy air of the house. The shadows seemed to grow longer around him, reaching out to envelope him in a way that no child should ever experience. No one ever asked what had happened. No one ever dared to confront the silence that hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. But they all felt it. They all knew that something was wrong, even if they could not bring themselves to name it. The truth of the family's downfall was not something that could be seen at first glance. It was not a single event, but rather a slow, creeping deterioration, a breaking down of trust, of love, of joy. The family had once been held together by something strong, something enduring. But now they were bound together by fear. Fear of the man who had once been their protector, their provider. Fear of the mother who had once been their comfort, their warmth. Fear of the house itself, which had once been a sanctuary but had become a prison. Behind closed doors, the terror that had taken root in the family's heart grew stronger. It was a terror that could not be spoken aloud, a terror that could not be named. It was a slow, insidious thing, creeping through the walls, through the cracks in the floor, until it enveloped every inch of the house. The family's downfall had not come suddenly, but through years of quiet torment, of unseen scars, of silent abuse. And as the shadows in the house seemed to stretch further, the walls themselves seemed to close in, the suffocating silence growing ever more oppressive. The truth of the family's suffering was hidden beneath layers of denial, of silence, of carefully maintained facades. But beneath it all, the terror festered, growing stronger with each passing day. And so the house stood, its walls heavy with secrets, its rooms filled with echoes of a time that was no longer. The family, once whole, had been fractured by something unseen, something that none of them could escape. The whispers that had started so innocently now carried with them the weight of years of unspoken fear. The mother, the child, the father, each of them trapped in their own way, trapped by the walls of the house, trapped by the darkness that had slowly crept in. What had happened to them? What had become of the family that had once been so full of life? The answers remained hidden, buried beneath layers of silence, beneath the shadows that seemed to stretch farther with each passing day. The truth, buried in the darkness, was waiting for the day when it would finally be uncovered. But until then the house stood silent, its secrets locked away, its shadows growing ever longer. It was many years later when the truth began to surface, like water creeping from beneath the floorboards, slow but unrelenting. The house, now abandoned, stood with the kind of silence that only time can impose. The once gilded walls had long since begun to tarnish, the dust of forgotten lives clinging to everything, furniture, windowsills, and forgotten memories. It was on a quiet, indifferent afternoon that the discovery was made, hidden beneath the floorboards of the house, wrapped in a brittle piece of parchment. A letter yellowed with age, its edges curled and fragile, its ink faint but legible. It was as if time itself had been trying to conceal it from the world. The letter was small, tucked away in a place that only a careful hand would have dared to search. Perhaps it had been forgotten for years. Perhaps it had simply been left behind, waiting for someone to uncover its truths. The letter was written in an elegant script, the kind that could have only belonged to a woman who had once been full of vibrant hope, a hope now long extinguished. Her words, though faint and worn with age, carried the weight of a life that had been slowly stolen from her, piece by piece. She had been the mother of the house, once filled with warmth and life, but now her story was one of quiet suffering. The letter revealed what had been kept hidden for so long, the family's dark secret, the shadow that had haunted them all. For years, the truth had been buried beneath layers of silence, its presence ignored, its weight too much to bear. The woman, whose name was now lost to history, had lived under the oppressive thumb of a cruel, possessive man. The father, who had once seemed so strong, so sure of himself, had become a tyrant in the home. His love, if it could ever be called that, had been twisted into something far darker, something that smothered rather than nurtured. The photograph that had once seemed so innocent, the one that had been preserved for posterity, a portrait of a mother and child in a moment of serene happiness, was, in truth, a lie. The woman had been forced into that moment, coerced into smiling for the camera, hiding the terror that lay just beneath the surface. The photographer had not known what lay behind the smile, nor had the world that would later see the image. The presence behind them in that photograph, the shadow that loomed over the mother and child, was not merely the shadow of light or circumstance. It was the reflection of a hidden figure, the father's illicit presence, always lurking, always watching even when he was not physically there. He was a constant specter in their lives, a dark cloud that hung over everything even when the family pretended to be whole, to be normal. The photograph, meant to capture a fleeting moment of happiness, had instead become a record of a life built on fear. The child, though young and innocent, was not untouched by the poison that had seeped into the walls of the home. His solemnity was not the innocence of youth, but the grim awareness of a home tainted by manipulation and fear. The letter spoke of a quiet battle fought in the shadows, a battle that no one had ever seen. The mother had fought to protect her child, to shield him from the horrors of their life, but it had been a losing battle. The letter was filled with words that would never be spoken aloud, the fear that gripped her heart every day, the constant anxiety of never knowing if her husband would be the man he had once been, or if he would once again become the tyrant that ruled their lives. She spoke of moments in which she feared for her child's safety, the times when she had to pretend everything was fine, when she had to wear the mask of a happy family, even as the cracks grew wider beneath the surface. And though the words were filled with sorrow, they also carried the weight of a woman who had fought to survive, to protect what little was left of her dignity, her hope, and her love for her child. The mother's struggle, so quietly endured, had been largely invisible to the world outside. But the letter, now uncovered, revealed the depth of the emotional and psychological toll it had taken. The family, once seen as the perfect portrait of stability, had been held together by threads of fear and manipulation. The letter spoke of an unrelenting force, a man who had sought to control every aspect of their lives, bending them to his will until they were nothing more than shadows of their former selves. His cruelty, though never fully acknowledged by those around them, had been a constant, silent presence, a presence that had stripped the house of its warmth and replaced it with cold, suffocating silence. The child, too, had become a victim of this cruel influence. His once bright eyes, filled with curiosity and wonder, had dulled over time. The letter spoke of how the child, even as a young boy, had grown to understand the oppressive weight of their existence. His solemnity was not the innocence of youth, but the knowledge that their home was a place of terror. The mother, in her quiet suffering, had tried to protect him, to shield him from the worst of it, but there was no escaping the reality of their lives. The letter ended with a chilling sentence, one that echoed in the silence of the room long after it was read. He was always watching. These words, written in the final days of the mother's life, revealed the truth that had been buried for so long. The photograph, the smile, the happy family, all of it had been a lie. Behind the image of love and devotion lay a darker truth, a truth that no one had dared to speak, no one had dared to acknowledge. The father's presence, though never overtly seen in the photograph, had been felt in every moment, in every glance, in every silence. His tyranny had cast a shadow over the family's life, a shadow that had stretched far beyond the walls of the house, far beyond the frame of the photograph. The letter had been a confession, written too late perhaps, but written nonetheless. It had taken years for it to be discovered, hidden away in the place where it had been left, tucked beneath the floorboards of the very house that had once been their home. And though the truth was finally revealed, it came at a cost. The mother's pain, her suffering, her fight to protect her child had been hidden for so long that it could never fully be undone. The house still stood, the photograph still framed in the attic, but the silence felt heavier now. The truth once buried had finally been uncovered, but at what cost? Some names only find peace once the truth is spoken. The mother's words, though written so long ago, still linger in the air, a reminder of a life lived in the shadows. The house, though empty, still holds the echoes of that dark past, and the photograph, once so full of light, now seems to carry a different meaning. The truth, long hidden, has finally come to light, but it is not a truth that can be easily forgotten. It lingers like a shadow, always watching. The estate stood in silence, its grandeur lost to the ravages of time. The once towering walls, now cracked and weathered, leaned toward the earth as though tired of holding themselves upright. The windows, once wide open to the world, were now boarded shut, their once beautiful panes covered with the grim remnants of years left to decay. Inside, the halls lay still, untouched by life, save for the dust that settled on the floors and furniture like the forgotten memories of a long-lost time. This was a house that had seen better days, days when laughter and light had filled its rooms, when joy had echoed down its corridors. But those days were long gone. The house had become a shell of its former self, much like the truth it had long buried. It had taken decades for anyone to dare confront the full weight of the discovery. Decades for the truth, hidden deep beneath layers of silence and denial, to surface. The house had stood as a silent witness, but its secrets, like ghosts, had been waiting for the right moment to emerge. Time had softened the edges of those secrets, but it had not erased them. The whispers of the past had become louder with each passing year, as if the house itself could no longer keep its silence. It had waited long enough. Now the truth was out, and with it came a legacy that would forever alter the way the world viewed the family who had once called this place home. The name of the woman who had suffered within these walls, once whispered only in fear, now carried a different weight. It was no longer a name spoken in hushed tones, hidden behind closed doors. No, now it was a name that would be remembered, not for the fear she had lived in, but for the quiet bravery she had shown in the face of oppression. The world had finally learned of the cruelty she had endured, the torment she had lived with, and the strength it took for her to survive it. Her name, once buried beneath layers of shame, now stood as a testament to the courage of a woman who had fought for her child, for herself, even when the world seemed to turn a blind eye. The child, no longer a child but a grown man, had long since removed himself from the shadow of his father. The years had taken him far from the house, far from the memories that had once haunted him. But the past had a way of following you, no matter how far you ran. And as the years wore on, he began to realize that the truth, his mother's truth, his truth, needed to be told. It was not enough to live in the shadow of what had been. It was not enough to carry the weight of the past in silence. The child, now a man, had become an advocate for truth, for justice, though he knew the cost of such a revelation would never leave him. The past had a way of clinging, of demanding attention, of twisting itself into the fabric of your very being. The cost of truth was high, but it was a price he was willing to pay. For the mother's sake, for his own, for the sake of history itself. The church bell tolled in the distance, its somber chimes echoing through the stillness of the day. The bell did not toll for the father, for the man who had inflicted so much pain, so much suffering. No, the bell tolled for both the victim and the sinner. It told for the mother whose life had been stolen from her, whose hope had been crushed beneath the weight of her husband's tyranny. It told for the child, now grown, who had lived through the silence, who had lived through the shadows, but who now carried the truth in his heart. And it told for the house, for the legacy it carried, a legacy that would never be the same. The bell tolled for justice, but not the kind that could be delivered in a courtroom. No, this was justice delivered by the echoes of time itself. It was justice delivered by the memory of a woman who had fought for her child, by the memory of a son who had dared to speak the truth. The past had come alive, and in its wake the house would never be the same. History had a way of remembering what people tried to bury. The truth, once hidden, had risen to the surface, and now it would be impossible to ignore. The photograph, once so full of light, so full of the illusion of happiness, now stood as a testament to the lies that had been told, to the lives that had been manipulated, to the pain that had been hidden. The photograph, the quiet smile of a mother and child, was no longer just a moment of peace. It was a reminder that some names only find peace when the truth is told. It was a reminder that the past could not be buried forever, that the truth would always rise to the surface, no matter how deeply it was hidden. The smile in the photograph, once a symbol of happiness, now carried a weight that could never be erased. It was a reminder of what had been lost, and of the price of silence. The house still stood, but it felt different now. It was no longer just a building, no longer just a collection of walls and floors. It had become a symbol, a reminder of the past that could never be undone. The truth had come to light, and with it, the legacy of the family had been forever altered. The once grand estate, now abandoned and forgotten, would never be the same. It was as though the very air in the house had shifted, as though the walls themselves were aware of the truth that had been revealed. The echoes of the past seemed to reverberate through the empty halls, filling the space with a sense of sorrow, of loss, of reckoning. And as the years went on, the man who had once been a child, who had once lived in the shadow of his father, would carry the truth with him, a burden that would never fully leave him. He would speak of the mother's bravery, of the father's cruelty, of the family that had once been. He would speak of the house, of the photograph, of the truth that had been buried for so long. And though the world would listen, it would never fully understand the cost of such a revelation. For some truths are too heavy to bear, too painful to remember, but they must be told. They must be spoken, or else they will haunt the past forever. Some names only find peace when the truth is spoken. The photograph, the house, the bell that tolled in the distance, these were the echoes of a past that could not be erased. And though time had passed and the world had moved on, the truth still lingered. It lingered in the air, in the walls of the house, in the hearts of those who had known it. The house still stood, but the silence felt heavier now. The truth once hidden had come to light, and with it the weight of history had shifted. What had once been buried was now remembered, and the legacy of that family, of that woman, of that child, was forever changed.